And we are live. G'day everyone, Mike Jeffrey here, and you are listening to My Creative Journey, episode number 34. To all you new listeners out there, hello, and thank you so much for taking the time to stop by here today. As I said, my name is Mike, and I'm a wedding photographer based here in Sydney, Australia. Each week on the show, I bring you guys along on the highs and lows of my own creative journey, and share all the knowledge that I've gained along the road to building my own freelance business. This week's episode, we're talking about my best productivity hack. This is a sort of a follow-up episode to episode number 29. If you guys have listened to that one, I was speaking about how I've had a lot of questions about how I can be so productive. And in that episode, I addressed that I don't think I am very productive, and I don't think that I would describe myself in that way. So go and have a listen to that episode if you haven't listened to it already. But in this one, I want to really touch on some of the things that I think have helped me a lot over the years, and some of the things that I think have allowed me to be a little bit more productive in the things that I'm able to do and allow me to stay on task a little bit more. But before we touch on that, let's talk about what has been going on for me this past week. And so, as you guys may be aware, I opened and closed my print store within the last week. So as this episode comes out, it will have closed last Tuesday. And that was a really sort of empowering project for me, something that I've been wanting to do for quite a while. And I was really glad to see the outcome of that, and something that I've spoken about in previous episodes. And I will make an episode about in the future about how that all went and what the process was behind that for me, and how the outcomes did align, and see what I was able to learn from that, and see where I sort of came from in that sort of process. And I think there was a lot of positives to take out of that, and I'm really happy with the way it went, and I'm really glad, and I'm very, very thankful for everyone out there who did support it, because I got so many messages, and I got quite a few orders off a lot of people who I may not have expected to get orders from, but also I got a lot of support from a lot of different people out there, and I'm so thankful for that. Now, I'm not going to drag on too much about it on this episode. I've spoken about it over the past couple of weeks, but I just wanted to give you guys the heads up on that one. The other big news within this past week is that weddings are back in Sydney. Now, they may only be back in small numbers, but they are back. And so that is exciting news, I think, for a lot of different people out there. A lot of people that I speak to in the industry are very happy that that is back, not only because as photographers we are allowed to start actually working again, but also for people out there who have had to postpone their weddings over the past couple of months. And it is very sad. And I've spoken about on the podcast before that I've had a couple who did have to postpone, and that is very sad for them. But I think with the opportunity now to be able to get married, I think they will take advantage of that, and I'm very happy for them, and I'm really looking forward to seeing where that can go, and I'm looking forward to seeing what opportunities that can open up for a lot of different people, because I think it will be very helpful for a lot of different people and allow them to be a bit more creative with what they do. I think allowing people the opportunity to get married, I think is a very nice thing, and it will make people be a bit more creative with what they do on the day, but also opens up for people like me and other creative people out there in the space to sort of offer different types of services. When you do have such a small audience that can be there on the day, you can offer more variety of services, especially not only in photography, but in videography as well, having a recording of the whole session. And so all different things like that are able to be opened up, and it's a great prospect for the next couple of months, because I've spoken about how over the past couple of months I really haven't been able to work at all, and that is a bit disheartening. So I've been trying to sort of lean into other areas, but hopefully with this opening back up, there'll be a few more inquiries out there, and hopefully a bit more work around in the industry as well. And the other big thing that I want to touch on is last week's episode. Now, if you guys haven't listened to last week's episode, I do recommend that you go back and have a listen to that one. It was a very productive chat I think I had with Stephen last week on that episode. We talked about a whole range of things, which I think will be very interesting for a lot of different people in the creative industry, and a lot of people who are wondering whether they can turn a hobby into a career, or whether they should just stay within a hobby and just use something that they are interested in, just be able to have that as a hobby and not have too much pressure on themselves. And I think that was definitely something that I went through a lot. And I think I like to hear it from Stephen's perspective as well, because I think a lot of different people out there do struggle with that. And so I hope we were able to give some insight into what we were able to do and what we were able to do in our own journeys going forward. And so hopefully that gives you guys a bit of an idea if you are interested in starting something, or if you have started something and are starting to think about you need to go the other way. So hopefully that was able to give some invaluable advice. And I have had quite a lot of downloads on that episode so far. I think it's my second most downloaded episode ever already in the past 2 days. So I released that episode yesterday, and it's already the second most downloaded episode. So that tells me that you guys were really interested in that, and really glad to have that episode and hear that conversation. I think it's a style that I've been wanting to lean into more. I've been wanting to do more interviews with different people, because I think I do have that sort of broad network of people who I can draw upon to give different experiences in a wide variety of areas in definitely sort of that creative industry. And I hope to be able to give that across the course of the next couple of weeks and months, because yeah, as I said, it is something that I really want to lean into. And I know that for me, actually being a consumer of podcasts, I really enjoy that sort of interview style. So hopefully I can sort of bring that onto this podcast. Of course, I do quite enjoy the individual episodes and the solo episodes that I am able to bring, because I think I can speak on things that I have a broad knowledge in, and sort of go to more targeted areas that I actually have insight into, and sort of give you my own advice, which I wouldn't give in that sort of interview style. And it's more about the other person. So I'm really glad that I have this sort of platform to be able to give that targeted advice to you guys. But I do really enjoy that interview style, and I think that is going to be something that I'm going to be trying to do a lot of moving forward. So do let me know if there is anyone or any particular style of person who you would like to see on the podcast, because I think that is definitely something that we are going to incorporate, and I would love to be able to reach out to some new people and sort of be able to get them on the podcast, especially in that format like we did last week. It was just over Zoom, having that conversation. We didn't need to be in the same room, but it's still, the information is the most important part. It doesn't need to be the most overproduced thing, but the information, I think, was the really important part. And so in this environment at the moment, we are able to reach out and connect to a bunch of different people. So that is really promising, and I really look forward to the future in that. Now, the last couple of things that I want to touch on before we move into today's topic all revolve around sort of social media. And this is something that we did speak about in last week's episode, but something that I really wanted to sort of dive into a bit more. I don't really want to make a full episode about it, but I really want to speak on some ideas that I've had and some things that I've been trying out recently. So if you guys may be aware that I've been trying to update myself more on my different types of social media, especially for this podcast. I've been trying to really work on updating the social media, and it's really been up to date over the past few weeks. And so that's been really nice. It's been nice to see that it's up to date and you guys are actually interacting with it. And I think that is really a really positive step, and it's really helping to grow the podcast, but it's also helping me to be able to create sort of content for people to consume outside of the podcast as well. I think one of the big goals that I had in the beginning of this podcast was really to allow a lot more people to connect with the podcast. And I think that through having it on different social media channels allows it to be connected with a lot more easily. I think the content that I provide here is able to help a broad variety of people. And so if people aren't actively taking the time to sit down and actually listen to a podcast, I'd still love to be able to connect with them in some form or another through that social media channel. And so I've been updating it on my Instagram and on my TikTok as well. I've started that for this podcast, and I think that is a great way to actually get a lot of information out to a lot more people. As I said, I've started to record these episodes on video as well, and you may have seen that through a few of the Instagram reels that I've been posting for this podcast have been in that sort of video format, and I'm glad. And I think that was one of the big upsides that I saw with the actual video format. I never sort of thought that a lot more people would actually view the podcast in the video format on YouTube. I didn't think that was going to be the role of recording the video, but I did think that allowing me to have those sort of video sort of clips to be able to use on social media allows people to sort of put a face to the name and gain a bit more credibility behind this podcast. I really enjoy actually watching videos from people online from their podcasts. And so if it's a video of someone actually being there having the conversation, it feels more real. And I definitely prefer that than just an empty screen with a few words over the top. So I've been glad to be able to have that and sort of move that in. And I think that's going to be one of the big drivers in trying to push this podcast out to more people. I've spoken about this before in wanting to get the podcast out, and you guys have been a big help on that because you've been really sharing the podcast around. I'm glad for that because it has allowed it to grow, and I'm very thankful for everyone who supported this podcast over the past couple of months. And so giving you more opportunity to be able to view the podcast, but then also share the podcast. I think that is one of the big things that people miss, is the fact that when you post something to social media, it's not just you promoting it. It also gives other people a chance to promote it. So for example, if I post a video, if I post a little snippet on Instagram and someone sees that, and someone who's already listening to the podcast, they see that and they actually really resonate with that and they think that that could help someone, they can share that around rather than just sharing the actual episode on their story or something like that, or just sharing a link on their story, because that may actually look a little bit weird. But if they're sharing something that I've already shared, then that can make it a bit more easy to break down that sort of barrier. So that has been one of the big upsides, I think, to be able to share that content around and be able to get it out to as many people as possible. But also the other big thing that I've been really noticing is sort of broadening the range of the actual content that I'm producing. So on Instagram, sort of earlier on, it was just posting photos on Instagram and then updating stories and things like that. But now actually moving into sort of reels and posting more sort of video content, I think has allowed for more growth. And I've definitely spoken about this. I spoke about this a couple of weeks ago, I think, in posting sort of more Reels content. And I've been trying this on all my social media apps. So I think I really first started it on the sort of podcast platform because I had that Instagram account for the podcast and I was posting the sort of snippets from podcasts as Reels, and they were starting to do really well as opposed to just when I would post a video on the Instagram page. So they were starting to perform well. And over the past 2 weeks, I've been posting a lot more Reels on my photography account as well. And that was part of the sort of marketing strategy behind launching the print store. I wanted to try to produce as much content as I possibly could. And being in lockdown at the moment has given me more time to be able to do that. So I'm very thankful that I've got more time to be able to produce that content. But I think that was one of the real big things that I wanted to do and be able to push more content out there and just try and see where the whole industry is at, see where the whole social media is at the moment, because I was always only posting sort of photo content, but posting more video content has been interesting for me because it's not something that I really do, not something that I specialize in for sure. So having the skills that I have in other areas and sort of using those to try to make sort of video content out of my photo content has been interesting, and it's been really working really well. And I'm glad to see that it's been working well, but I've also sort of had to take a step back and not be as perfect as I thought I was going to be at the start, because it's not really what I am prioritizing all my time into. It's just I want it to be something on the side. And so I've sort of given myself that sort of freedom to post whatever I really want to post and diversify myself into that area. It's been nice to see that there has been some sort of growth in that, because I've spoken about this before, and that the growth on Instagram has been sort of stagnating over the past year, probably over the past 2 years. And so you don't see the sort of reach that you would have gotten a few years ago. So it's nice to see that sort of growth and that sort of reach is coming back through Reels and by posting content and trying to diversify content and use content in different mediums is really nice. I've also spoken about being on TikTok as well. And that was something that I spoke about earlier on with my wedding photography, in trying to put myself on TikTok more and sort of use that to grow some sort of awareness about my business as well, and using that on Instagram, trying to convert some of that Instagram stuff over onto TikTok and work out how I can use that new form of medium, I think is really important, trying to keep up with the times and trying to keep up skills in different areas that are obviously working for a lot of different people. I think if you're falling behind on those trends, there are still heaps of time to get on board with that, because it is going to be something over the next couple of years that is going to grow more than just any sort of photography content. And I'm noticing that as a photographer, but also noticing it as someone who produces a wide variety of content, trying to use the content that I already have and come up with creative ways to use it in videos. And that has been really rewarding. And I hope that you guys have seen that. I hope that you guys are sort of taking advantage of that and take advantage of all these new mediums out there and take advantage of the ways that you are able to be creative that you may not have been before. I think for me, I was scared to sort of jump in because it's never something that I've done before, as I said, never something that I thought was interesting, but I've sort of given myself that freedom to just create whatever, just throw it out there and see what works. And I'm still in that experimenting phase, and I'll report back to you guys if I do have any insights. I may make an episode about it, about what I think the ways are to grow on social media these days. And I've made an episode about social media before, but I think it deserves an update as I experiment more with it. And I think there are some real positives to come out of this, and there will be a lot of new ways to sort of market yourself moving forward. And I'm glad that sort of reach and that sort of growth is able to come back on Instagram, because it's very, very disheartening for a creator when you're putting time and effort into work, but it's not getting the reach that you really want it to get. And it's not really reaching anyone outside of your immediate audience. So that's where it becomes important for you to have that sort of audience, which will sort of share around your work, which will promote you to their audience as well, because that is very beneficial when the Instagram app itself isn't promoting your work. It's nice to have that network of people who are promoting your work. And I've seen that definitely work over the past couple of months with my photography, because it's not being promoted on the app. Other people are promoting it for me and sort of sharing that around. And I'm really appreciative of that. But then also trying to use the other aspect of finding a new way to grow in the app has been really nice as well. And so that's where I'm going to leave that introductory chat. I'll probably speak about it a lot more over the next couple of weeks. If you guys have any questions on that, would love to know your thoughts. I'd love to know what you think about Instagram Reels. Have you tried it out? Have you been experimenting with that? Have you been experimenting on TikTok as well? Is that something that you've really found success with? I'd love to hear about it, because I think it's exciting that all these new mediums are out there and we're able to still see growth into the future with these new mediums. But for now, I want to jump into today's topic, which is all about my best productivity hack. And I want to keep this one short and sweet because I know last week's episode was a bit of a longer one, and I want to keep this one nice and short. But every time I say that, it seems to drag out. So who knows how long this will go for. But the best thing that I have, and I'm just going to be upfront with it, the best thing I have is to eliminate as many decisions as you possibly can. Now, this may sound like something that you've heard before. It may sound like something that's fairly easily done, but I think when done properly, it can really help. And it's been one of the things that's allowed me to be a lot more productive with my own work and a lot more productive in the things that I think that I need to spend time on for starters, but then also productive in the work that I'm able to do and productive in the time that I spend on my work. I'm sure anyone who is any type of creative or anyone that runs their own business would know that making decisions can be hard, and you can get to a state of decision fatigue where you've made too many decisions for the day and you really can't decide on what you want to do. And you never want to get to that point. You never want to get to a point where you're making too many decisions and you're having to use up too much of your mental energy to make decisions. So you're not spending that on other things that you could be working on. You're not spending that on being creative when that is what the aim of the game is. You want to be as creative as you possibly can. So you want to eliminate as many decisions as you possibly can. You want to take out the decisions that are just rudimentary in the way that they don't need to be made every single day. So this is one of the real things that I've used in a lot of different areas, but used majority in work to eliminate distraction, but also eliminate other different things that I know I need to be working on and eliminate things that I know I shouldn't be working on. You may not have been aware of this, but humans make about an average of 35,000 decisions per day. And I've heard this a few times actually recently, and I think it's sort of really struck a chord with me because it's been something that I've really been thinking about a lot recently. You know, when you're trying to buy a new car and you're interested in buying a new car and you don't think anyone's ever heard of that car before, but as soon as you hear about it, you'll immediately start to see more of those cars on the road because it's something you've been thinking about. I've been thinking about this a lot recently, so I've been hearing about it in all different places, and I never thought it was something that people were talking about until I started thinking about it more. But it's astounding to me that we make that many decisions in a day. And you may think that I don't make any decisions. I haven't made any decisions while I've been listening to this podcast, but there are sort of micro decisions that you are making regardless of whether you think you're making them or not. And those are still taking up mental space, even if you think they're not taking up space. So you do have to make decisions in your day. And I'm not saying that you won't have to make any, but we're trying to eliminate as many as we possibly can, especially in the early hours of the day. We all know that in the morning is prime area to be able to do our best work. And I think in our own mental capacity, a lot of people work a lot better in the morning. A lot of people make their best decisions in the morning. Their most productive work is done in the morning. Their most creative work is mostly done in the morning for a large majority of people. There are those people who can work into the evenings, but I would argue that work is not as productive. It might be as interesting. You might be engaged in the work, but it may not be as productive as the work that's done in those early hours in the day. So we really want to eliminate decisions in those hours. So we're opening ourselves up to give ourselves more spectrum to be able to make decisions that actually impact us or to be able to be creative or to make actual work decisions that need to be made. I'm sure a lot of you already have a structure like this, but you probably just aren't aware of it. You're probably already eliminating a lot of decisions in the morning, but you're just not quite sure on what those decisions are. Most people have the same thing to eat every single morning for breakfast. A lot of people do it, and there's a reason behind this. There's not really a lot of people out there in the world who would have a completely different meal in the morning, and this is based around the fact that we want to eliminate that decision early in the morning. I don't want to have to get up every morning and have to think what I'm going to eat that particular morning. If I was waking up every single morning thinking about what I wanted to eat and then driving to the store and getting all those ingredients and coming home and making what I wanted to eat, that would be a lot of decisions to make in the day, and that's so draining on you to have to think about that first thing in the morning. You don't want to have used all your brain power to think about what you're going to eat when that is such a rudimentary task. And I'm all for experimenting. I'm all for changing it up every now and again, but I don't think that the breakfast routine needs to be changed every single day, So we are probably all making this decision. We are all probably making that decision to eat the same thing every morning. And there are probably other decisions that you also make when you go to a cafe in the morning. You know what your coffee order is. You don't have to think about that every single time. If you were changing that every single day, it would become harder to know what you're going to do. And that is stressful to have to think about that. It's such a rudimentary task. It's such a easy decision, but that actually takes up a lot of mental space. If you're thinking about, I have to make a new one today, I have to think about something else in the morning, I have to think about what I actually want this morning, that's going to be hard. If you were going to a new cafe every morning, that would also be hard because you have to work out which one you want to go to, There are a lot of people that exercise out there. They probably go to the same gym every day. They probably don't decide on a new gym every single day because that's a big decision. You don't want to have to make that every single day. You don't have to decide where you want to go every single day. So that's what I'm really talking about in taking most of those decisions out of the early part of the day. So you're opening yourself up and giving yourself more opportunity to make other decisions, because I think this allows you to be a lot more productive in more ways than one. So what types of decisions can we eliminate? And I would say there's a lot of different things you can eliminate, especially early in the day. There's a lot of different decisions you can eliminate throughout the day in being able to plan and schedule a lot of the things that you do. A lot of people would argue against this and say they don't want to be that rigid in their life, and that is fine, and I totally appreciate that. And I'm definitely not someone who is that rigid in my life that I can never move anything around, but I think it's a good idea to have some sort of base to work from. I think if you are constantly making a new decision every single day and what you're going to do every single day of the week, you would become easily drained. It's nice to have some freedom and nice to be able to do what you want when you want to do it, but maybe reserve that for on the weekends. If you're not working, if you're not trying to get things done, reserve those for those days of the week. But most of the days, I think we should be very structured on what we do, and that is going to allow for the best environment to get as much work done as we possibly can and be productive in that work that we're trying to do. So things you can plan are what time to get up in the morning. This is probably something that a lot of people do just before they go to bed, is think about what time they want to get up, and then they have their alarm for that particular time. If it's just the same time every morning, it's easy to get in that routine every morning because you know what time you're going to get up. There's no have to question about that. There's no question about what you're going to do because you're going to be up at the same time every morning. You don't have to move your schedule around based on what time you're going to get up. If you exercise in the morning, is that something you do the first thing in the morning? Is that something you do in the afternoon? Where do you exercise? Do you exercise in the same place every day? Are you trying to do the same style of exercise every day? Are you always someone who goes for a run, goes for a walk, always goes to the gym? These are things that we need to take into consideration because that is another decision that will probably weigh very heavily on you. Are you someone that has a shower in the morning? Is that something you do in the morning, in the night? Do you eat breakfast in the morning? When do you start work? Do you drive to work? Do you get the train to work? Do you get the bus to work? How do you get to work? All these decisions, you don't want to be having to making that every single day on a whim. These aren't things that seem like overly important tasks, but when you're having to make that decision every single day of the week, can take up a lot of brain power and can have a real negative impact on you by the time you even get to work. By the time you even sit down to do the work you really want to do, you've already used up so much of that mental energy. So have a think about that and have a think about the decisions that you can eliminate early in the morning, because that will open you up to a lot more in those productive hours of the day. And then after you get to work, it also comes down to scheduling the things that you want to do on that particular day. So making sure you know when you get to work what it is you're going to do. Plan that decision ahead of time. So make sure you know what your routine is when you get to work. Make sure that first hour, that first couple of hours are very structured. You may do the same thing every day. You may do a variation on a routine depending on what day of the week it is. You may not do the same particular task every day. Depends on the area of work you're in. Depends on what type of field you're in. You may even change it up every single week, but making sure you have a rough schedule so that you're not, once you get to work, you don't have to then plan what you're going to do, because there you're sort of losing time there for starters. You're losing time planning what it is you're going to do, but then you're also losing brain power by having that first half an hour to plan what you're going to do for the day. If you're spending that time, you're using up a lot of that energy that you do have when you're fresh in the early hours of the day. As an example for me, I like to get to work and try to start my work at about 10 o'clock every single morning. So that is sort of a rough guide for me. I try to aim to be there at about 10. I don't like to start work too much earlier. There are other things that I like to do in the morning, and that I like to sort of push work back a bit later in the day, and I've found that has worked well for me. It may not work for you. You might be someone who likes to get up first thing and start work straight away. I'm not that type of person, so I try to push it back a little bit. But once I get to work, as I've spoken about before, I've started this routine of every day when I start, I sit down and do an hour of editing every single morning. And I've found this to be very productive. And I spoke about this a few episodes ago, and I did say I would report back. And this is probably my report, that it has been very good. I've really enjoyed that hour every day. It's been nice to have that sort of structure and sit down and really work for that first hour of the day, not have to think what you're going to do first thing in the morning. Also, I spoke about it in the episode that I really talked about this, was that being able to sit down and work on something that I'd already been working on means I'm not starting from scratch every single morning. So there's another thing, that I'm not having to come up with a new idea every single morning, because I'm continuing on from the idea from yesterday. And once I get in that flow, that's when I come up with new ideas, and then I can write them down or even start on them so that they're there ready to go the next morning. So that first hour is already blocked out. And I've already said that I don't work more than an hour because it allows those ideas to be continued on the next day. I don't want to have to use that whole idea in one day and then the next day not know what to do. So I'm sort of trying to chop it up and be more consistent. And in that way, I'm probably being able to come up with more ideas. I'm being able to be more productive with that hour and be more stringent with the time that I do spend. And as a result, I'm able to get more done in, say, that 5 hours a week, spending 5 days, an hour every day, rather than if I just sat down for a 5-hour block in one day. Now, there are exceptions to this rule. Obviously, other different things that is good to sit down in a big block and try and do that sort of task. Like I wouldn't record half this podcast on a Monday and record the other half on a Wednesday. It's good to get it all done in one block, and it's good to be able to do that. But in other different things, it's good to be able to space them out and good to be able to spread it across a couple of days. The other thing that I do is, of course, with this podcast, I do record it on Tuesday. So I know that I record it in the afternoon, and I know that that is something that I do. I know that that time is specifically there for that. So I'm not making that decision every single week on what day do I record the podcast this week, or what day do I have to edit the podcast this week because I edit it on a Friday. You know, those are things that I already know. It's out on a Monday, record Tuesday, edit Friday. Those are things that I have in place so that I know that every week. I've already got to make enough decisions around this podcast and like what the things are that I talk about, that I don't want to have to make the decision of when to record it or in what style to record it. I know that I have this exact same angle every week. I don't want to be changing the background every single week. Those are things that I don't want to have to do. So trying to stick as easily as we can and make the actual barrier to entry a lot smaller, because we're able to get more done by being strict on what we actually do and by actually knowing what it is we're going to do before we even start. And I have this same sort of routine around a lot of different things, you know, like for example, emails. I mostly only answer emails on Mondays and Thursdays, and I like to schedule that time in. I like to plan out that time, and I know that I answer them at a particular time on a Monday and a Thursday, and I don't think that I need to spend an hour every day going through emails. There's probably no need to do that. And so being able to put that time together and actually just to do them 2 days a week is really nice. And there's a lot of other different things out there that I do schedule in specific areas of the week, that I know that I only do this on a Thursday, I only do this on a Monday, and only condense it to a shorter amount of time. If you plan how long it's going to take, you will only use that amount of time. If you give yourself an open-ended target and say you're going to work on it all day Thursday, then you will work on it all day Thursday. If you give yourself 3 hours to work on it on Thursday, you'll only need 3 hours. So make sure you plan the amount of time, because it's crazy how much that can impact how long a task takes. If you plan for it to take a certain amount of time, it may go a bit longer, but it's not going to go drastically longer. If you plan for 3 hours, it won't take a whole day. But if you plan for a day, it will take a day. So make sure you're very strict on how long you're allowing yourself to do tasks, but also knowing what days and when you actually do tasks. I don't want to continue to drag on this idea, because I'm sure you guys have gotten the point by now that it's great to be able to schedule that amount of time and plan what it is you do through the day. The best advice I could give you is to make sure you're planning those things early in the day and remove the amount of decisions, the amount of easy decisions that you need to make early in the day, because there will be decisions at work that you do need to make. As anyone knows, in any type of creative field, there's a lot of decisions you have to make, and a lot of creative decisions that you want to be able to have mental space to be able to do that and get work done in a shorter amount of time, is to be able to have mental space to be able to do and make decisions that you need to make. So don't be out there making every single decision every single day. And the other thing that I would really say is to plan your next day the night before. Now, this sort of goes back on what I was talking about before in having set days for different things. There may be things that do come up throughout the course that you may not have been aware of. So planning different days, and you may work in an environment where things are very sporadic and there's not things that you do constantly every single week. As I said, I only gave the example of the podcast and editing photos and answering emails, because a lot of the other stuff that I do is very sporadic, and it can happen in 1 week, but it may not then happen for another 3 weeks. So I do have to still do those tasks, but it may be very sporadic, and I may not be able to plan them as much as I would like. So then the next best step then is to plan your next day the day before. So I think this really does two things. It allows us to use our time to our best advantage and really get the task done when we know we need to get the task done. But also it allows you to not make that decision in the morning. It allows you to not sit down first thing and make decisions on what you're going to do for the rest of the day in the morning. If you've already got a plan, it makes it so much easier first off to get to work and have something that you know you're ready to work on, because that decision of when you get there, I may not have anything to do, because that can often happen as well. If you don't know what you're going to do, you may think, there's nothing to do today, so I'll just slack off a little bit. It gets to the afternoon, you remember, I actually had 3 things to do today, and I've just wasted my whole day because I haven't done anything about them. If you're planning that the day before, if you get an idea, you know something you've got to do, write it down for tomorrow, and then schedule time early in the morning to be able to do that task and get that out of the way first thing, rather than thinking about it in the afternoon and thinking, I might do it today, or I'll just move it back and I'll remember to get that done at the end of the week. If you are planning time for it later in the week, that's okay, but actually schedule a bit of time for it and plan for when you're going to do that task. And then finally, the other big thing that I would say is to set deadlines. This is super important. It's not only just important to be able to set an amount of time you want to work on something in a particular day, but also if you have a big task coming up, if you want something to do, if you are trying to actually achieve a certain goal, make sure you do set a deadline for that, because it will drag on forever. For me, when I was trying to open the print store, I had to set a deadline of opening the print store on this date so that I knew that I couldn't just continue on, it'll be right, I'll do it tomorrow. There was a deadline in place, even though there may not have been a deadline actually set by anyone else. I've got to set a deadline for it. I record this podcast, I know that it has to be out on a Monday. So that is a deadline that I've set for myself to make sure that I get it out every single Monday. And that sort of holds me more accountable. And then I can plan backwards from that and plan that I edit it on a Friday, that I record on a Tuesday, that I do all these things, and I know when things need to be done so that I'm not stressing out about it in the day before or the day of. And that has really allowed me to be really productive in the work that I've done, because planning those deadlines and moving things around based on those deadlines is a very productive way for me to go about things, because I know what I've got to do and I can plan backwards from those end deadlines. So I think that is all I'm really going to say about this today, guys. I hope this has helped you in some way or another. I think it really helped me the first time I was exposed to it, and it may not seem like such a big thing, but I think once you implement it in your own life, you'll start to see the advantages of this. You'll start to see how planning out those first couple of hours of the day can allow you to be really productive in the day. And then also, if you are able to achieve a lot in the morning, you feel a lot more freer in the afternoon to have those creative ideas and really execute on them. If you're trying to get all the work you need to get done in those early hours of the day and planning that time around them, it allows you to use your afternoon to do whatever you want. And most of the time, that is when you will come up with your most creative ideas. And if you have a really creative idea, either execute on it then or hold on to it for the next morning so that you know what you're coming to sit back down to do the next day. And that can be really helpful as well to not only drive you to get back to work, but also to continue those ideas on so you're not starting with that blank page the next morning. If you guys did enjoy this episode, I would love it so much if you did share this episode around. I really do appreciate all the support that I get on this podcast, and I'm under no illusion that that is why it continues to grow. As I said before in the podcast, if you ever want to just share something around on social media, any of the content that I do produce on social media, if you wanted to share that around, that would be very supportive and be able to help me to grow this podcast. And I really do appreciate anyone who takes the time to do that. Also, don't forget that you can actually rate this podcast. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, I would love it if you guys could go and rate the podcast. You could go and give me some feedback. I really enjoy listening to that. I don't have many listeners over on Apple Podcasts, so if you are over there, I would really appreciate that. You can't actually give a rating to this podcast on Spotify, unfortunately, but if you're on Apple Podcasts, I would love it if you did give me a review on what you think this podcast is like and if it has been able to help you in any particular way. Also, if you're new around here, I would love to hear from you guys. Have you really been enjoying this episode? Where have you come from? Have you come from my Instagram page? Have you just stumbled across me on TikTok? I don't know. So if you guys are really enjoying this episode, I would love to hear from you guys, and I would love to hear what you're thinking of the podcast. As I said at the beginning, if there is anything that you want to hear about, or if there's anyone you want me to interview on this podcast, I'm really trying to lean into that as well, and I'm really enjoying that style. So if you guys have any suggestions, I would love to hear from it. But until next week, guys, I hope you have a great week, and I will speak to you all again next Monday. Bye.